Welcome to Lyric Lab Poetry. In this video, I'm going to talk about reading your work publicly, something that strikes fear into the hearts of many poets. Many writers don't come from a performance background, so they feel maybe a sense of inadequacy. Well, I wrote the poem to be read, and why am I having to perform it now? And performance also is seen as a bit of a dirty word, I think. I think because we often conflate performance with overly sort of actorly renditions of text. That's not always the case. There are some basic performance skills that you should try to equip yourself with. But here's the most important thing. You have spent a great deal of time crafting a poem, and then you're asked to read it publicly. Surely the very least you can do to service that poem is to pay it some attention before you actually get to the reading, and to rehearse how you're going to read it. And also, of course, if you've been given a certain length of time, how many poems can comfortably fit within that framework, and the order in which you should present them. That should be considered at the very, very beginning of the process before you get to the rehearsal. So let's imagine you've got, a week to prepare, and you've been given maybe a modest 5 to 15 minute slot. The thing about reading poetry is, assuming you're not reading one long-form poem, you have the chance to present several fully formed pieces within that 5 to 15 minute framework, something that is not afforded to the novelist or the non-fiction travelogue writer. You have the chance to make certain shifts within the structure of the reading itself, moving from one maybe heavy poem to a lighter one. So really think about that order very, very carefully. Now, how do you actually rehearse a poem? I think the first thing is to go back over your own work, look for the words that maybe have resonances with each other. That could be rhyme, it could be alliteration, and think about how that will sound out loud by speaking it, practicing it out loud. Think about where the natural pauses and breaths are in a poem. Think about the certain words that you want to imbue with a certain kind of weight, and think about how the poem is going to travel as you're reading it. Enjambment is the thing I'm thinking about, where the voice will naturally carry on from the end of one line on to the next, and how breath fits into all of that. There's a lot to think about. So you really can break it down and mark up your poems as if they were a script. This is what an actor would do, and mark the places where you intend to breathe. Don't forget to breathe. It's really quite important. Other things I think about a public reading, know beforehand whether there's going to be a microphone, and when you are working with a microphone, you don't need to raise your voice. If it's a big room with many people, you might just feel that natural inclination to raise your voice. You really don't need to do that. I do that, and I'm mic'd up today, and I can even feel myself doing it now. Obviously, I'm not really raising my voice, but I can feel my diaphragm working, and I think I could just talk at a much lower volume. You would still hear, and I think that's basically a habit from my background of having trained and worked as an actor for many years. The fact is that I think Philip Larkin said that he really didn't like going to poetry readings because he never knew how the poem was going to end. And obviously, when you've got the poem on the page, then this is a very different experience. You have control over when to stop, when to go back, when to press the pause button, when to think about what that word really means, and to really look deeper and allow the poem to unfold in a slower fashion. You don't have that luxury when you're at a poetry reading because someone else is reading at their pace, and you're having, often I feel, personally, I'm having to catch up with the language that I'm trying to digest and understand. And we're talking about the heightened distillation of language with poetry. So there's a lot often to unpack, even in a small poem. So take your time. One thing that will happen, and it's very natural, is nerves. You're going to get nervous. So just consciously think about your shoulders, relaxing your shoulder, lifting your chest, and think about trying to take a few deep breaths before you actually read. And don't be afraid to stop after a poem and take a sip of water and maybe connect and interact with the audience, maybe explaining a little, not too much, about the poem that's going to come next. so you can build a kind of natural rapport with the audience. And then when you go into the reading of the performance of the poem itself, it does want to feel alive. And I say that because there is a kind of what I would call an anti-poetry reading way of reading, and it's something known as poet voice. You will be familiar with it, so I'm going to demonstrate it for you by starting to speak in this way that lets you know I'm now reading a poem. And if I continue speaking like this, you will all gently fall asleep. That's what happens. It has a soporific effect. Avoid it. Do not operate machinery or drink alcohol while you are listening. And on that point, don't drink alcohol actually before or during your performance. I call it a performance, and I want to kind of rescue this word or kind of, reclaim it, because it is not a dirty word. Realism, we live in an age of realism where hyper-realism dominates our kind of primary storytelling mode through TV and through multimedia. It's important to be natural and truthful, but the poem holds its own truth, right? And we want to get to that. So don't worry about making a big sort of performance of what you're doing. Just really focus on the language and take your time. You can read it slowly, but really do try to imbue it with meaning, your meaning. And aren't you, after all, as the architect of the piece, the originator of the work, aren't you really a really good place to start from as a listener? There's a curious relationship, isn't there, as well, between the reader's eye and the poet's words on the page versus the speaker's voice and the listener's ear. It's a very different dynamic. So it's important that you take your time and think carefully and practice reading the work out loud several times before you get to read it publicly. Working with a microphone can be difficult. As I said, you tend to want to raise your voice naturally if you're in a larger space, but you don't need to do that. I think being heard is not just about volume, it's about enunciation and a few tricks and tips you can use to warm up your voice, and more importantly, your speech, because your speech is about the clarity without sounding like you are overdoing it. You want to sound natural, of course, but you do want to be heard. Words that maybe are unusual because they're words that are in a poem, but you need to take your time with those words especially and make sure that they are heard. What else would I add to that? Sometimes you're not working with a microphone, you just stand at the lectern, you have somewhere where you can put your poems, and then you are having to, I suppose, use the diaphragm more, and it's not really as intimate an experience because you're having to really project. This advice and guidance, of course, is not really intended for the performance poets or the slam poets, because that's their thing. They tend to have brilliant skills when it comes to putting their work across and structuring it as a kind of performance. We should take note. There's a lot to be said for being well rehearsed. You're presenting yourself before people, and that can make you feel vulnerable and nervous. The thing is that many people won't see the nerves. You will register them, and the people watching often won't. So just remember that what the outside sees is not always what's going on beneath the surface. So just hold your own, hold the space, and know that you are in control, and things will only unfold the way that you want them to unfold. That's what a rehearsal is for. It's about consistency of delivery, and that's what Stanislavski, the Russian theater practitioner and acting coach, was really striving for when he worked with actors. He wanted to know how was it that one performance he'd seen several nights earlier, and which was brilliant, could be so terrible several nights later when he took his friends there after having raved about how great a show it was. And it's about consistency. It's about relaxation, concentration, and a few tips and tricks of the trade. So a good way to warm the voice up, and we become often very constricted vocally as tension goes into our neck and shoulders. Try to relax those things consciously. But you can also practice with a silent K, the letter K. tends to open up the back of the throat, and I can even feel a yawn coming on now, because a yawn is also a brilliant way of relaxing the voice before you get started. So that's one way to combat or a silent laugh as well. It opens up the back of the throat. Don't do this in public, by the way, or during someone else's reading, of course. And I remember from my time when I was working still in Los Angeles as an actor, not really, I wasn't acting, but I was working as a voiceover artist, and I would drive down to the agents' offices where they have booths to record the audition material, and I would be in the car stretching my tongue like this, and speaking lines of text with my tongue stuck out like this, because when you do that, if you read a line of text, shall I compare thee to a summer's day, thou art more lovely and more temperate, and you do it with your tongue stuck out and really try to pronounce it as clearly as you can, when you put your tongue back in your head, then you read the line again, you will discover it's suddenly so crisp and clearly enunciated without you even trying. So that's another really great kind of warm-up technique for your speech. And I think that's about it. The other thing I would say finally, just before we go, is to say, try and enjoy the moment. That may sound really difficult, but this is a real celebration of your work. You created this poem, maybe you published the poem, and now you're being asked to read your poems out loud at a public reading. That's a wonderful thing, that people get to hear your work, and you want to do it justice. So rehearse, and rehearse well, and remember to warm up and try to enjoy the experience. Thanks for watching. And if you've enjoyed this video, please do click on the like and the subscribe button. And you can support the channel in other ways by clicking on the Buy Me a Coffee link and the Patreon link in the description below the video. And of course, I'll be back very soon with more poetry content.